for joining us. I'm your hostess, Kayla Byers, and this is Champions of Discourse presents Debate This. This season, we will see two debaters go head-to-head in an impromptu battle of wits and passion. Each week, we will have a new judge to adjudicate the round. And by the end of the season, we will crown the winner. If you'd like to hear a bit more information about how debate works, check out our previous intro video. The link is in the description box. With each round, we hope to equip you with the tools necessary to be a critical thinker. This round, in addition to our distinguished debaters, Leah Johnson and Jeanelle Hope, the judge will be Dr. Leah Johnson. Dr. Johnson is the wife of Calvin L. Johnson Sr. and a mother of 8. She holds an educational doctorate in educational leadership and assists families across the country by teaching financial literacy. Let's go ahead and get this round started.
Hello and welcome to an episode of Champions of Discourse presents Debate This. I am your host, Leah, and I am with my opponent, Jeanelle. Thank you very much. And I have my mom today, special treats, Dr. Leah Johnson, for our adjudicator today. Thank you so much for joining us, Mom.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Right. Can you just check the topic to make sure that it is written out correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Just let us know when the timer starts for the 15 minutes of prep.
Okay. Time starts now. Welcome back, ladies.
Thank you very much.
Ready? And so the government now will have 6 minutes. And your time starts now.
All right. Awesome. I first like to thank my opponent, Leah and Dr. Johnson, for serving today as our adjudicator and our timekeeper. Today's resolution is ethnic studies should be taught in high school. And I'd like to first start with a little bit of resolutional analysis. With this being a values case, we're going to define ethnic studies as a field of study that centers on the histories, experiences, cultures, and politics of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Specifically, African American studies, Chicano Latino studies, Native American studies, and Asian American studies being sort of subfields that are classically known or fall up under ethnic studies. We're going to take that as should be institutionalized or instituted or made accessible. Taught, we're going to define that as curriculum and instructional offerings that are being made available. In high school, we're going to define high school as grades 9 through 12 in American schools. With this being a value case, our values for today are going to be, I'm going to pose two, one being quality of life, and the second being job creation. In addition to that, our criteria today is going to be qualitative analysis. So with that, I first like to get into my case. I have 3 points that I'd like to lay out today. My first being that by instituting and offering ethnic studies at the high school level, we'll first be able to, this is a quality of life argument, insert marginalized histories and experiences into the curriculum. For far too long have our history books really centered whiteness and masculinity, really white men, old, dead white men. We are in an era and a moment where people are demanding and stating that representation matters. We have been saying this for decades, to be quite honest. I think back to Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro in early text, as well as some of the movements that came out of the civil rights and Black Power eras, where these calls for a more diverse community and people-focused curriculum that included these narratives were called for. So absolutely, we need to push and include ethnic studies at the high school level so we have this greater representation so youth can see themselves in their own curriculum. Moreover, this is an opportunity for us to learn about difference in a rapidly diversifying nation. It is projected by 2040 that we'll be a majority nation, but this has already happened in states like Texas, which is a majority brown nation, and in districts like LAUSD, where the Latinx population outpaces its white population. right? These students need to learn about themselves since they are, in fact, parts of the majority. And that is the way in which the shift that our nation is going into based upon sort of birth rates and cultures and trends. Also, this is a field that highlights that really highlights the wealth of contributions that people of color have made to this country, right? And by having and bringing ethnic studies and this greater representation to the high school level, we'll literally be able to write people of color into the very fabric and histories of this nation in ways in which they have been historically marginalized and excluded. Again, that's my quality of life point. Number two is that my point number two is that we'll be preparing students for the workforce and the world around them. This is both a quality of life and somewhat of a job creation point. My third point is more job creation, and I'll get to that a little bit later. To preparing students for the workforce, ethnic studies teaches students to be global citizens. It teaches them how to work with and for very different, diverse groups of people. How to not necessarily code switch, but how do you become culturally competent? How to address people from different cultures. It instills this value in different languages, right? Having this cultural competency can help transfer into various sectors of the workplace, including marketing, being able to market for Black products, for products that are specific to different ethnic groups. It relates to film, also different product development as well. There's also this field of ethnic studies that speaks to social justice, right? Why there's this need to protest, right? This is the sort of preparing them for the world around them, why we need to stand up for human rights. And ethnic studies is an opportunity to really combat and squash the rise of white supremacy that we're seeing in the world around us. And finally, my point of job creation, by having more ethnic studies teachers and teaching happening at the 9th through 12th grade level, we will have a creation of jobs in this sector. We have ethnic studies programs that have existed for over 50 years. And there have been no primary school teaching opportunities or secondary school teaching opportunities for these folks who have these degrees. So it would be a net benefit of job creation as well. And that is why I urge a government vote.
Thank you.
I didn't realize I was still on mute. I'm sorry. Okay.
Now we move to Hobbs, and you have 7 minutes. And you may begin.
Thank you very much to the government for presenting a pretty solid case. Thank you to the adjudicator for being here today. We're going to start with on case, and then I have two other points that are off case. So firstly, I agree with the definitions. However, the value, I am contending that we can accept quality of life, but job creation is not really valued because that's breaking up two different values and giving less ground to the opposition. So we should stick with the value of quality of life, which fits in most of her arguments. So it doesn't have a huge impact on the case, but focusing on job creation as opposed to value of quality of life, we will have a better argument, be able to get more in depth about these topics. If we focus on one value, the criteria of qualitative analysis, I agree with, I'm fine with. Into her first point, we should institute ethnic studies into high schools because representation matters. And this is very important. This is actually one of my first cases. However, let's look at who's going to be teaching. Currently in our system right now, there is no funding. The socioeconomic areas that would actually benefit and where I have most impact, there is no funding to support it because we have put so much money and investment into No Child Left Behind and to Common Core curriculum, which has depleted the system of resources, making parents responsible for anything extra that needs to be added to the curriculum. The strain that is already on the stress system is going to have the cost passed on to the parents. Means that there's going to be students who are left without acquiring this education. Means that we shouldn't do it, because if we only offer to some and not to others, that gives a sense of elitism in certain areas, which we already have right now, and breaking that area where we have ethnic studies instituted across the United States. We have only the areas that it really wouldn't make a difference for them to have it. So this means that we should not institute ethnic studies into high schools. My second point would be the people who we have in place right now which is to her third point. The people who we have in place right now are mostly white teachers. If we look at the Carolyn Hodges of the world, the Kaburi Fundi, and even Jeanelle Hope, they are all teachers in higher education. They look like us. And having that representation is important in high school, but we don't have that in high school. Right now, we have a lot of white history teachers who will be teaching ethnic studies. If we don't have people who look like us, teach us who we are, teach us where we come from, and our parents are at work or our parents are, even reading books with us, we are in school all the time, them teaching us who we might be, when before all we learned was Christopher Columbus, Malcolm X, and maybe MLK. Then having those people then try to switch over to teach us that we're important in somehow, some way from their own framework without having people who look like me teach me about my history, that would do me a disservice. It is better for us not to offer it than to offer it halfway, because then we have this brokenness of identity in the students where they're not really sure. They're told that maybe they should try to do something different, but then they're also warned, just like with MLK, just like with Malcolm X, of what happens when they do try to go against the system, when they do try to fight against what we have. So we do need I do agree that we need representation, but since we don't have it, it's going to be more detrimental. It's going to be more detrimental to offer it to our students in high school. The next point is high school is not set up for diversity of thought. The reason why ethnic studies works in college is because in college, that is where you challenge yourself, you challenge other people, you challenge the system, you challenge your thinking, you challenge everything. In high school, you are taught to the test, you are taught to add and maybe know a couple dates, maybe know how to write your name in MLA format, maybe. But high school is not set up to teach you how to be a free thinker. It's not teaching you how to think for yourself. It doesn't teach you the skills that you need to be elevated in your mind. It's better if we have ethnic studies as a community set up as something in the community as opposed to high school, because again, if we have ethnic studies in high school, there are going to be people who don't have access to it. And when we have people who don't have access to it, again, that creates elitism, which it decreases the quality of life, because now people are being looked down upon because they don't have access to it. If the parents are not able to pay for the books or pay for the schooling or pay for whatever it is that's extra that be added to ethnic studies, then that means that those kids are now left behind. The last point that I'm going to talk about is she brought up the argument that we'll be able to write people of color into books. We look at McGraw-Hill, and we look at all the other, like even in Texas, there's a lot of publishers in Texas that are trying to rewrite history books to say that slavery was immigration, and having those history books write us in, or write people who were enslaved, people from Africa, my ancestors who came in, who are being written into textbooks in this way. When we don't have people who can effectively change that, we look at Franklin Hope's book. That is a college level textbook. And if we have we have ethnic studies in colleges as opposed to high schools, we have the ability to break that discrimination, to combat white supremacy more effectively, and creating global citizens. As she pointed out, the only way we'll be able to do that is if we have a system that's set up for diversity of thought, which is college. Having that in high school, when you're only taught to teach to the test, when you're only taught to learn dates to be able to get, pass the exit exam or pass the STAR test or the orbit test or whatever testing there is. In college, you don't have that. In college, you have the ability to have diversity of thought. So until we break the system and start over, which would be necessary for an overhaul, that's the only time that we can actually affect change in having ethnic studies. So if we enact it right now, we would have more children left behind, more children with broken identities, more children who are unsure of their place in the world because they don't have people who look like them affirming who they are in their identity. And with that, I urge an opposition ballot.
Thank you. Government for 4.
All right, let's get right to it. I want to refute the opposition's rejection of my job creation value that I place, really because the opposition isn't given a really solid reason and doesn't provide really good comments or points to refuting my third point. But let me get to their on case and off case. It was a little bit hard to follow. The first point that they made is who's going to teach this? There's no funding to support it. All funding has been aided by No Child Left Behind and Common Core, which has depleted resources. And this is kind of a farce. No Child Left Behind is no longer around. This is Bush era education policy that really has been phased out. Common Core in and of itself, if you look at it, it mentions ethnic studies. It certainly is a footnote. It isn't part of the centering of ethnic studies, but it is there. It talks about these sort of diverse histories. And so by making ethnic studies a high school requirement or really taught, we would then be building on Common Core. So there is much room for this, right? If we think about ethnic studies as a field that comes out of the social sciences, history, right? It comes out of psychology. It comes out of sociology, all disciplines that are already taught. Moreover, how ethnic studies is currently being taught within some schools, not all, as you mentioned, and we'll get to some of that inequality, is being taught as an elective, right? So it can certainly, there certainly is room for it. Students have to take electives. Electives change. They don't necessarily stay the same. They change with time. So ethnic studies absolutely can be elective, and there's absolutely funding for electives. And I would say that that is one way that schools could be able to institute it. Not necessarily the only way, but it is a way. The opposition really does not say anything to my point about preparing students for the workforce or the world around them, right? And the true job skills, the cultural competency skills, they don't mention anything of that. So the adjudicator should really see that as a main point to the government here. What they then say on their, it seems like they're on their off case, is that high school is not set up for a diversity of thought. Again, this is also a fallacy. Some of the key skills that are pushed within Common Core are critical thinking and an analysis, right? So what do you mean that there is no room for exploration of thought? What happens when our students are writing 5 and 8 paragraph essays? Those are opportunities for them to be critical thinkers. We want to see if they're comprehending the readings, if they're able to pull out their own thoughts and express themselves. And you keep saying, wait until college. Well, that's also very elitist to say, because not everybody has the opportunity to go to college, but every child has the opportunity to go K through 12 in this country. Not everybody will go on to community college, and not everybody can afford to go on to university and other realms of higher education. Something that also came out from the opposition was that this whole notion of being able to write people into history, but we don't have these folks that will be able to do it in a meaningful way. Yes, we do. Right. As I mentioned, and we also don't have teachers that will be able to teach ethnic studies. Yes, we do. This was to my job creation point. I mentioned that there are a plethora of ethnic studies programs that exist throughout the UC system, the CSU system, various areas of higher education. And there are people on the ground who have these degrees that have been wanting jobs. We need to create these jobs for folks to be able to take them on so they can write the textbooks. And there are some really good ethnic studies textbooks. And because ethnic studies is an accessible field, it isn't necessarily contingent upon a sole textbook. We can use primary as well as other secondary sources. And teachers who are currently in there, the white teachers who may not have this training, can be taught. That's the whole purpose of professional development. They can go through and get a credential for this as well. So to say we don't have teachers, to say, we don't have the textbook, those are really sort of lazy arguments that are at stake. And again, this should be a point for the government as to why ethnic studies should be taught in high school.
Thank you. And to the opposition, you have 6 minutes, please.
Okay, I'm going to follow similarly in her fashion. I'm going to start with my points first and then go on to hers. Firstly, the argument of the value case, all the government said was that the opposition did not make a clear enough argument as to why we shouldn't have two values. As I stated previously, we are going depth versus breadth. So having multiple arguments across different values, it makes for a messy debate. So having one value that we're putting everything on is going to make for a very cleaner debate, a much cleaner debate, and a more clear understanding of what we're arguing. The government completely dropped this, and so you should only look to the quality of life the quality of life value in our arguments to weigh them. I apologize, to weigh them. So Firstly, the government states that all the subjects that she mentioned, first of all the subjects that she mentioned are taught in college. One, two. Even though it sounds elitist to say that you learn in college, I also did make the argument that even in the homes, because even in my home, we did Black study. We read books on Tulsa. There's education that can happen at home. There's education that happens in the library. There's education that happens in your community. You do not have to go to college to get these. But all the subjects that you mentioned, all the teachers that you mentioned are all higher ed. They are not going to take a pay cut after getting a master's or PhD degree to go and teach in high school because the funding is not there. They are not paying our teachers. Our teachers have to come out of pocket for things like pencils, like tissue, like notebooks. If our teachers are coming out of pocket for that, we do not have the capacity to be able to build upon having ethnic studies in our schools currently. Now, with the argument of the critical thinking being built into Common Core, there's a huge, let's understand, there's a huge difference between Common Core mentioning ethnic studies and actually applying it. And I'm not sure if anyone has been into the high schools recently or into any of the schools between New York and California. These high schools are lacking in resources. These high schools are lacking in funding. They're lacking in representation. They're lacking in teachers. So while the critical thinking skills may be written into Common Core, the actual application of it is not happening because all the teachers do is teach to the test to make sure they can get their bonus and keep their tenure. That's all that is happening. And the kids are being left behind. Adding something else on top of that of getting a credential to learn how to be able to teach ethnic studies, especially when you don't look like me, is going to be ineffective. That is going to be even more detrimental and decrease the quality of life of the high school students. That is not fair to put on the teacher and on the students to have an ethnic studies course where people who don't look like them is telling them about their history when we've seen previously that has not worked. And there is that identity, which my opponent never discussed, the lack of identity and the agency that the student has in their life. That decreases their quality of life because they have people who don't look like them that are telling them who and what they should be, but also probably giving them a warning of this is what could happen if you decide to buck the system. This is what can happen if you have a diversity of thought. But that's why it's taught in other areas outside of high school. So you don't just have to go to college, but those courses are offered in college. And I'm sorry?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. So we're just going to get straight to the voter issues. One, I cannot see a person who does not look like me telling me about my history. When I had Carolyn Hodge, my first African-American studies teacher, teach me about history, that was more impactful than having someone who does not look like me tell me what happened, tell me to empower other people. The impact of having someone who looks like you tell you that you can be more than what you're doing, the impact of the students having the identity to know that they did not just fall out of the sky like slaves, like McGraw-Hill are telling us that happened, that we were immigrated over. Those kinds of things are the impacts that will happen if you vote for the government. Secondly, it's more important. We don't have the funding right now to do that. Yes, No Child Left Behind is a Bush era, but the effects of what's happening is still going on because people are still teaching to the test. Common Core didn't change anything. All they did was say, hey, let's do this as well. Let's change the way we teach math. Let's go back to memorizing words and not math facts. Let's break down things and make things a little bit more difficult for the kids. That's what Common Core is doing. Common Core is not offering anything. Thirdly, let's remember, high school is not set up for this. High school is definitely not set up for diversity of thought. You think about in high school, in the 80s, maybe it was set up for you to be able to be certified, to be able to be a plumber, to be able to be whatever, a vocational field. But high school today is just set up to make sure that you can add and make sure that you know some dates in history. That's all that high school is set up to do right now. You may write a paragraph here and there, but they're just making sure that you can pass the test so they can keep the money in their pocket and make sure that they can get a job next year. But there's not going to be any fights between higher education teachers and teachers in high school that are fighting for jobs. That is a fallacy that the government is trying to make a statement here. But with that, I urge an opposition ballot.
Thank you. And Gov, 3 minutes, and you may begin.
All right, just hop right into the voter issues. Lay it out. Why one? Quality of life. Ethnic studies brings greater quality of life. And here are my points. It introduces students to key skills, how to work with diverse groups of people out in the workforce, in different communities, and it brings a cultural competency that we see is necessary and will certainly be necessary for whether or not you're a police officer, a teacher, or an executive at MAC Cosmetics. People need to be culturally competent, and ethnic studies does that. Two, it equalizes education, right? Not everybody can go to college to get ethnic studies. Why not introduce it now? Not everyone has parents that are steeped in the Black history and Asian American history who will be able to teach and provide that level of care for them at home, that additional learning. Why not have it addressed in the classroom? So we're providing an equal footing of education by addressing it at the K through 12 level, where all of our students have access to a similar education, right? Three, again, the opposition didn't really want to deal with this, but it does create job opportunities. There are ethnic studies degree holders, many of which who have bachelor's degrees, right, who have gone on to become teachers. Because ethnic studies has not existed at the K through 12 level, many have just been history teachers, social studies teachers. So they then could transition into ethnic studies courses. And I also want to ask you a question. Should white teachers not be forced to learn ethnic studies? As a Black woman, I teach modern European history as a non-European person. We should be well aware of all of the histories and cultures of the world. This is how you become a global citizen. And yes, we can talk about identity and how, teaching comes across based upon folks as different races, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't learn and should be knowledgeable and should be able to say something and respond adequately and teach their students, right? Why I want to also lay out why the opposition clearly lost. They really don't address what quality of life benefit there is being brought by not teaching ethnic studies. They keep saying over and over and over again, just wait for college. High school isn't a place for analytical and critical thinking sort of development. Well, if not high school and you can't go to college, then where? Why shouldn't ethnic studies be taught so we can challenge our students to be able to then have these skills that you're arguing don't exist, even though I completely disagree with that, because Common Core, some of the key skills are analytical and critical thinking. And so with that, I urge a government ballot.
Thank you.
That was a good round. That was a really good round. All right, Ma, you have 2 minutes to review your notes and to let us know who won and why.
Thank you.
While the judge is reviewing the cases presented, you should take this opportunity to share, like, and subscribe. All the YouTube things. Who do you think won this round? Let me know in the comments down below. And the results are in.
Okay.
Alrighty.
All right. Thank you so much, ladies, for your arguments, and both prepared quite well to defend the Gov and the opposition. And here are my notes, just really briefly. Jeanelle, thank you for introducing your case points by the 3, inserting marginalized history, preparing students for the workforce and job creation. What I'm finding that Deborah or Leah, your argument was really due to you're finding that you mentioned that there's lack of funding, and you did mention the No Child Left Behind, which was now history, and but you also mentioned the effects of the lack of funding and what was put in place to meet that need, preparing, having teachers in place, that there are really not an adequate amount of teachers to teach ethnic studies. And so what I'm finding that when I say what I was expecting to hear was perhaps geographic locations, because you have throughout the United States more schools who have different races who are in place. You have in the suburbs and you have in the urban areas as well. So I was expecting either the government or the opposition to really bring in some of that information as well to support either position. And when you're speaking about the parents, definitely, I know your time was short, but you kept it general when you spoke about parents and the parents' home who would be teaching. And then, Jeanelle, you brought that there are not enough parents in the home to teach. And so more points could have brought about that to make either points, um, um, your statements stronger. You mentioned ethnic groups, Leah, you were speaking more to Black people. And I believe, Jeanelle, you mentioned you brought in Asians. And so when we're speaking about ethnic groups, it's not just one culture, but it means all cultures. And so to the point that you were saying that, Jeanelle, that we should be preparing teachers to teach students how to be global citizens. And I appreciate all of the points that were brought. The stronger points, Jeanelle, you did mention, again, you argued regarding the No Child Left Behind and even the Common Core, the ethnic studies, and what's contained in Common Core. And so what I'm finding both of the arguments were good. However, I must say that, Jeanelle, you had a stronger argument as to why ethnic studies should be taught in school based on the following. Your argument said that students should be taught, and there's 2 points, students should be taught how to think critically even before they get to college. And I find that to be true. Also, all students are not going to be able to get to college. And so those are 2 strong points that I found for the case regarding ethnic studies should be taught in high school. And for those reasons, I do award this round to Jeanelle.
Thank you. That was such good feedback. I think that was the best breakdown we've had from a judge.
This was the first time that I've done that.
Oh, good. You will be ready. You could go
Yeah,
for 4 rounds.
you can judge.
Oh, goodness.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This has been another episode of Champions of Discourse presents Debate This. Thank you so much to Jeanelle. Thank you to Dr. Leah Johnson for being our adjudicators today. We will see you next time. Be sure to tune in next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Champions of Discourse presents Debate This. I have been your hostess, Kayla Byers. Be sure to tune in next Thursday.